welcome to Stephen King Book Club again, because I'm here. We're going to talk about Cycle of the Werewolf, Stephen King's probably shortest book at 130 pages, right there. And then, maybe we'll talk about Silver Bullet, his screenplay adaptation of that went through a number of problems. Yeah, I think we will cover Silver Bullet today. Yeah, why not? Yeah. So join us as we break down Cycle of the Werewolf, which became Silver Bullet, which became a different director's film altogether. It's going to get crazy. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your crazy uncle, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. You can follow the show on Instagram and on X. Heck yeah, we have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and great content, as well as an opportunity of what movies we can review on future episodes, with, of course, a shout out to you. Both Kyle and I, of course, are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for other critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're talking about a 80s staple of Stephen King stories turned into movies. It's Silver Bullet.
Yeah. So in Tarker's Mills, people are dying, and young Marty Kozloff thinks it's a werewolf. He just has to convince his family and friends. Easy enough, right? While trying to stay alive in the process. Thankfully, he has a new wheelchair cycle, his Silver Bullet, to protect him from the danger.
So this is mid-80s Stephen King. This is the height of his abuse of drugs and just alcoholism, and it's interesting to put cycle in the title because I think that is just kind of repetitive too. This is also kind of a staple of Stephen King stories, and what I mean is it's child's in dangers, but the monster is a metaphor of something deeper going on. We're talking about werewolves, but you don't even get to see a werewolf very much. Not even late in the movie.
I feel like that might have been intentional, but it also might have been all of the problems with getting the werewolf put together. You had Carlo Rambaldi, who was making the werewolf creature effect, and both he and King really wanted more of a wolf man. They really wanted to go back to the idea of the 40s, of the guy who is still a man in many ways, but he's got wolfish features, as opposed to the bigger films that had done, like American Werewolf in London, where he's on all fours running around like a crazy one.
It's almost like a beast. And that is another component to this. It's the investigation of argument of werewolves are a wolf, or are they a man, then just have the snout and everything, like that. And a lot of werewolf movies, you get a delay of seeing them, right? You don't get them right away.
Yeah, and I know that the studio was very not okay with how the werewolf looked, and King put his foot down. He wanted to have the wolfman creature. He didn't want to emulate everything that come before, but I do feel that might have had part of the reason as to why the werewolf doesn't show up as much, as maybe the studio had some editing choices where we pulled out some stuff. That
remember Wolfen, we always had like the camera was the wolf, and it was like, okay.
Yeah right. Trying all we can, because we can't beat American Werewolf in London, so we're going to try something different.
Okay, so this is Corey Haim. This is before he was the big teen heartthrob of the late 80s. It has Gary Busey, and round off the rest of the cast is...
Well, we got Everett McGill, which if you're a fan of Twin Peaks at any point in time, you're going to love Everett McGill. He also appeared most notably, I think, in The People Under the Stairs in the early 90s as well. With his Twin Peaks wife, Wendy Roby, as his wife in that film as well. So this is a good catch if you got here.
That's deep investigation.
But I've always been a fan of Everett McGill because of my connections to Lynch. Him appearing in Dune, him appearing in Twin Peaks, those kinds of elements. You mentioned Gary Busey, and you mentioned Corey Haim. We also had Megan Follows, who plays Jane, the sister. She's not done as much kind of stuff since then. She was most notably, I think, for Anne of Green Gables. She did the film series kind of in the mid-'80s during that time, where she played that notably. Those films have kind of disappeared over time, but she is a part of that. And I think one of the people that doesn't get mentioned a lot in the film is Tova Feldsha. She plays the older Jane who's narrating the film.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so she was recently in like Armageddon Time. She was in Lady in the Water. I think she had a really great, multi-episode arc on TV's The Walking Dead. She played the leader of Alexandria, and I think she did a really great turn on that show. Doesn't get as much love in some of her smaller works, and it's almost uncredited here. It's so buried beneath everything else. But Tova, I think, does a really good job narrating it. A couple other people I want to mention, of course, Terry O'Quinn as Sheriff Joe Haller. If you're a Lost fan, you are aware of Terry.
Oh God,
O'Quinn.
yes.
He's the stepfather none of us wanted, I guess.
Right.
And also,
Right.
should be no. We're going to cover Stepfather. Don't worry, we're going to get there eventually.
But he has a great.
We also have Lawrence Tierney as Owen Knopfler. Again, like some great Stephen King character names. Lawrence Tierney appearing in this film. Unlike when he was working on Seinfeld, he did not steal anything off the set this time around.
In Reservoir Dogs, I think he was stealing like
stealing things
salt
for
and
that.
pepper shakers and stuff.
And of course, Bill Smitrovich, who played Andy Ferriton, one of the town locals that gets involved in the posse. Bill Smitrovich is a titan of like guest star appearances on television. You may have also seen him. He was the uncle in The Phantom, a film we covered previously on the show. So a lot of kind of high caliber character actors really helping to pad the film out.
And overall, this is another of when King is starting his career of childs with kind of a disadvantage or disability in peril.
Yeah.
Like Carrie, like The Shining, you can even attach Firestarter to this.
That's true.
And Cujo. In this one, it seemed that he was comfortable with that kind of a formula of not presenting this disability as a crutch, but somehow it was almost like a superpower.
Yeah. And I think part of that, it's unique because this is a Stephen King written screenplay. But if you've read Cycle of the Werewolf, it's drastically different. The actual book itself is the reason why it's called Cycle of the Werewolf is because there's a chapter for every month of the year, and it covers one calendar year. Okay. And I do wish they had gone back to that cycle idea.
Yeah, but you're interesting because you're like Monday or something.
Yeah, and so you get to see the werewolf during all the holidays as well, and you get to see like a year cycle of what's going on there. Okay. A number of the characters from the screenplay as they exist were not in the book. They are almost vignettes of 12 scenes, if you will, that took place during that time, and it kind of molds like what Tarker's Mills is as a town, and you get to see that kind of world. But I do think that's probably one of the reasons why it molded into more of a singular character story, is because we don't spend enough time in that book with any one character to really get time. But it's curious because as it molded into this, we got the silver bullet like device, the wheelchair cycle. And of course Gary Busey's addition to the film as well is very different than any version of Cycle the Werewolf was. So this movie had a number of permutations because of course Don Coscarelli was originally attached to direct, but he was let go and replaced with someone who was kind of gonna say yes a lot more, which was Daniel Attias. So
probably yes man to what King wanted.
Well, to what King wanted, and De Laurentiis, of course, producing the film, had a specific thing he wanted as well. So they almost needed somebody between the two of them that could decide things because both of King and De Laurentiis really wanted different visions. So,
all right, so you have one staple that's predominant in King stories of the late 80s and 70s, which is a child with a disability in peril, but not to mention the friction of having a sibling that kind of is the over architecture of the story, which is the kids' relationship. But also you have a town that's just on the peril of destroying itself.
Yeah, we mentioned
and all it takes is just a little bit of the kindling's right there, and all it takes is just somebody just to start it.
Yeah, if you watched the episode of Scary Saturdays with Kyle when I talked about Needful Things, that was one of my favorite things about that. We just got done talking about The Leopard Man, which was about a town kind of turning inward on itself with fear. These stories are universal, and if you grew up in a small town, you know everyone in this film.
Yeah. So it's almost like a town just on the cusp of destroying itself, but also when it wants to, you almost when in danger, you turn to some kind of a spiritual guide, spiritual leader. And this is King almost having his outwardly disdain for religion. Organized religion. That people, when they're in danger, look towards, but that makes it even more dangerous, and that's his point of view as well. And then you have all this kind of a mixture kind of a thing that you see a lot in King stories.
Yeah, it harkens back to elements of like
now I'm saying these not to criticize
clothing.
I'm not saying it to criticize him. I'm just saying this is kind of what he presents.
Yeah, and especially during this time period, he admitted himself, especially once he had children and once he realized that children can be in peril and it scared him as a father. If you're going to write horror, you write what scares you. What scares a father? Having something come for his children. And I think you can see a ton of them throughout all of his films, especially things like Pet Sematary, the idea of that loss and that pain. And even when the story leans a bit more lighthearted, like this film kind of, it leans in and out of that darkness. There's always that element, older Jane, as she's describing the events, there's a sadness in how she describes her youth with her brother because it wasn't very friendly at times, and it wasn't very good at times, but she looks fondly on it still. And there's that kind of element of our past is never really clean. That
Right.
really pervades a lot of his work.
And it's also what the history of the town that doesn't get talked about a lot, but there's something always there. Right. Gary Busey's not acting. I think he really was drunk.
No, it should be noted, Gary Busey's, more of his lines in the film are ad-libs by him than actual King lines. And I find that I really want to see a documentary just about King and Busey
together
just on set for that, because King was apparently just perfectly fine with Gary Busey just riffing. So basically they would shoot a scene where he did the line as written, and then they would shoot a couple more takes where he would just explode into insanity,
right,
and just see what kind of boiled out of there. And so that's a real combination.
I don't want to get to my review, but it would just, one of the criticisms was King's likeness and appreciative of an alcoholic. And I think this is absolutely wrong, because just because you're an alcoholic doesn't mean your personality is rotten.
It doesn't mean you're an evil person. It doesn't mean you don't have goodness in you, I guess. And that was probably King looking inward as well, as he was dealing with a number of personal issues, was that, his, am I a bad person for being an addict, for being this, who I am? And I think we've both known people who have struggled with addiction before. It never made them evil people. It may have impacted their lives in negative ways. Absolutely. But there was still a person in there. And I think that's what Gary Busey really kind of imbues with that.
Yeah. So this came out when?
It was 1985. Direct center of that 80s cheese.
And I think it came out like in spring of 85.
I think so, yeah.
Because there was a big void of summer movies in 85. That's we were talking about later. But this took a lot of, I would say, steam to get rolling, because people weren't ready for. I think people were like, oh, King did a werewolf movie.
Yeah.
Eventually, he was going to get to that, and we're kind of done.
He had a checklist,
I think people were already like, of course, and they weren't really giddy about this coming out. Was that making my point?
Well, I have to assume that, we didn't live in the day and age of like the internet back in 85 where all the on-set stories would have gotten out.
Yeah.
But there had to be some rumbling that maybe things were not going all that well. Of course, replacing a director with a person who'd never directed a feature film before.
Yeah.
That could be.
And there was a lot of anticipation of this as well.
But of course, the idea that the shooting of the film began without actually having a werewolf suit. Like, they were figuring out the werewolf suit.
Well, they did that for Gremlins.
Yeah, but Gremlins got lucky that they figured it out.
Right, they figured it out. They're like, the whole process of, no, we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Yeah.
We'll save it in editing. Yeah.
And this is definitely a case where I kind of lean towards what De Laurentiis was saying, which was that, the Wolfman costume doesn't really look enough like a wolf or enough like a man. It's kind of just, it kind of comes off as a bear dog or something. So you can tell that they're struggling to figure out those elements, and just kind of rolling with the punches.
Right. And also, this seems like, if you take out the werewolf, it's an enjoyable, just a coming of term, like kids coming of age.
Yeah. It's got that Corey Haim in the 80s flavor to it that you can really see. Like, if this had just been a story of a kid messing with his sister with his drunk uncle.
And then realizes he's got a motorized wheelchair that everybody's jealous of. And
Yeah. It takes a left turn pretty heavily when that silver bullet shows up. That almost has no bearing on the actual film.
So it's perfect timing to get into it. Let's get our review of Silver Bullet. Now, I'm not going to say if you went like Stephen King movies or things adapted by Stephen King. It'd be very, very, I wouldn't say not rare, but it kind of a surprise if people put it like in their top 5.
Yeah, I wouldn't see this in mine at all. But
But it's one of those, if you enjoy Stephen King stories and what I present like an archetype formula of these movies, you kind of understand where you're coming from. You would probably enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah. I think I've always believed there's 3 tiers of Stephen King. There is the iconic Stephen King films, and I'm talking about the films here, of course, where you have your Shinings and you have your Shawshank Redemptions and all those. Right. And then on the opposite end, you've got things like The Mangler and like the multiple Children of the Corn films, that just kind of belong there. I think Silver Bullet rests firmly in the top level of the cheese, where it's like, that middle section where like it's perfectly flawed, but it does have those likable.
I'm glad you brought it up. It's very much melted into the cheese, but it gets into the right temperaments at the right time.
Yeah.
And if we talk about a previous movie has the right beats and the story might be the greatest, this has the right beats to it and the changes, I think. But the overall story, and he's supposed to be this metaphor of the kids, kind of misses out. But I
Yeah.
love when it gets to the horror, we get to the horror. When
Yeah.
we're having a good time and fun.
It's filled with a number of really great sequences as well.
Yeah.
That, not always, sometimes when the film opens up and Marty's got this whole thing where he accidentally trips the sister with the snake and she falls in the mud and there's that very
Yeah,
cheesy
right.
exchange between them. That doesn't work really well. I don't really like the relationship between Jane and Marty at the beginning because there's very much like why are you so nice to him because he's in a wheelchair? And it's like, well,
Yeah, slap
this
her.
is odd.
Right, no.
But the
It's
moments
80s,
where
that's
I
what
think
you
it
did,
really-
right? Yeah.
I think it really works like that scene where the silver bullet ends up being chased by our killer, our werewolf creature,
Right.
and he ends up in this rickety bridge, and he's got to try and hey, somebody help me.
No,
I
that's
think
one of
really
the best
tense
sequences.
Yeah.
I love that part of the movie.
And then the dream sequence, of course, where we see like the entire congregation turn into these creatures. It's certainly cheesy, but it's effective cheese as well.
Right.
They put the best makeup in the front, you can tell, because everything in the back it's steadily lower.
You
lower
pause,
brow.
you pause and like, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the werewolves in the back of those rungs look like Howling 3, the marsupials kind of levels of bad werewolf.
I mean,
movies.
you kind of figure out who it is. Like,
Yeah, I'm not sure when we're supposed to figure it out, I guess.
Right.
There's a number of times where it's like, well, it's obviously guy A, right? Like, it's obviously so-and-so, but that kind of works for me as well because, again, like, sometimes the audience needs to find out things a little bit more and then watch the characters figure it out.
yeah, it's almost like I kind of figure out, but then you want to make sure it codifies as you watch the movie.
That's true because it isn't directly saying at any point until it like really has to tell us. But there's moments where you could figure it out, and it's kind of a nice feeling to know you were right.
No, there was a scene, and he did a great job with it. And you're like, oh my god, that might be him. I can't believe it could be him.
Yeah.
And he does it with non-vocals, but he just kind of like just that non-vocal acting.
I particularly like once they know that they have to look for someone who's got a damaged eye. And the scene of her going door to door trying to trying to collect cans. That's another great scene in a movie. So for all of the, schmaltzy things and all the things that just don't really connect, I'm so happy with the scenes that really work in the film. And it does, I'm sure there's a little bit of nostalgia. I did grow up with this movie, so it was part of my internal canon.
But it has that same, I don't know why we were doing it in 85, very much like Fright Night. It has that little bit of cheese, but then it goes really dark at the end.
Yeah.
And then you have like a light little flare of their relationships. And it's kind of weird that I'm assigning it to make, but it came out the same time Fright Night did.
Yeah, and they both had those elements of, the person next door isn't who you think he is, It's just this is more the person in the town. And that's what I think is special is you kind of have to ask yourself questions about the werewolf, and how he's existed in this town for so long.
Right.
Your
Your
mind
mind-
is very much the kind of story I want to know more about.
You're like, it's exactly, what the hell's going on?
Yeah,
Right.
and that's why it makes me sad it's only a 130-page book.
you always say when you do a Stephen King story, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Right.
So keep the conversation going. Add a comment down below. What do you think of what we have to say about Silver Bullet?
Yeah, let us know what you thought down below, and let us know which Stephen King film you'd like us to cover next. I know I'm going to be covering more on Scary Saturdays.
Oh my God!
We'll probably be doing.
We
more on
love
this main
werewolves
show.
in the '80s. There's other werewolf movies in the '80s.
We could probably do a top 10 werewolves of the 80s episode for our picks and still come off with some pretty good cheese on the bottom. So,
Yes.
yeah, so let us know your thoughts down below on Silver Bullet. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
And maybe what do you think is the strangest Stephen King book to movie adaptation? You're allowed to say Lawnmower Man. And thank you guys for joining us so very, very much. We appreciate it.
We're going to ignore Tommy Knockers because that's kind of him like, all right, I need help.
Yeah, I'm going to have to watch that movie again to see how
It
that
is just
adaptation
bizarre.
turns out.
Right.
I don't really remember much of it.
Right.
But yeah, you can always find a number of my Stephen King reviews and horror reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
Right. Check
So-
out his website. And you can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.